Once upon a time, in a faraway land,
What are fairy stories?
The strange and wondrous place where nothing is as it seems.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest one?
Fairy is a perilous land.
Before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep
It
well.
is the place you visit
A world
in your
of
dreams.
myth and magic.
when the clock began to
The
chime
evening
midnight,
star sailed down through the
A
sky.
mysterious voice began calling to the sad
She
princess.
pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the
In a
small
trance,
forest
she
window.
followed the haunting
and peered
sound
into
of
the
the
hollow
winding
tree.
stairway to the top of the
You
tower.
can read along with me in your book.
she waved her wand and said the magic words.
Let's begin now.
Well met, witches, and welcome to Storybook, Sacred Lore of Witchcraft. Today we have a guest in our circle, Joanna, the Polish folk witch. Hi, Joanna.
Hello.
Would you like to introduce yourself for everyone?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to be talking about some Polish folklore and tales today. As was already said, my name on the interwebs is Polish Folk Witch. I create content and write articles about Polish folklore, Polish folk magic, and also currently in the process of writing a book about those topics as well, which can be expected to come out next year. Very excited for that as well. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I'm so excited you're here. We also have Dave, the Weathered Wise Man. Hi, Dave. Can you introduce yourself for everyone?
Sure. I think everybody pretty much knows me by now, but I'm Dave Gaddy, the Weathered Wise Man. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I am the author of The Simple Magic of Wild Things and just am in the process of signing for my second book called Be the Witch That You Are. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell. My practice is a mix. It's an eclectic mix of traditional craft and American folk magic. Specifically Appalachian folk magic, just because of the location that I was raised in. But that's me in a nutshell.
Wonderful. And thank you for being here. Joanna, how would you describe the craft you practice?
Oh, I guess I skipped that part. So you can probably guess that I practice Polish folk magic. That's kind of the main part of what I do. I am just really in love with bioregional craft. I am an animist. It's very important for me to be including the stories and practices of my ancestors in my craft. I live in Poland, so this is very much just something that's been present in my life from birth, I suppose. I also do incorporate aspects of traditional witchcraft into my practice. So I would say it's like a syncretic mixture between Polish folk magic and traditional witchcraft.
And Poland is a very Catholic country, is that correct?
Yep.
And is that a large part of your witchcraft then, or how would you describe that?
I have to say this is something that's very interesting here in general, because you will find a lot of practitioners here actually do come to their craft from the Catholic perspective, but that's not all that there is to it, I guess. For me, as an example, I am somebody who is more on the heretical side of those Catholic practices. So I do utilize them, but more in a way that, the typical thing in folklore where you kind of reverse some of the religious aspects, like working with the devil instead of working with God, syncretizing some of the figures of saints, for example, or the cult of Mother Mary with local spirits that kind of have been there before those Catholic figures. So that's kind of what I do. I wouldn't say that I am a Catholic myself. I do incorporate those elements, but in a very much heretical sense. Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. And you brought us a tale which in fact you translated the tale for us. That was very generous. I'm so excited. I don't know that any podcasts have necessarily talked about this yet in English. We have The Legend of Mister Twardowski in 4 parts. And for all the listeners curious, that episode will have been released separately previous to this one, and you can hear Joanna reading the tale for you. What made you think of this tale specifically to discuss today?
You know what? I felt really like this tale was missing out there to be heard by people in the broader world, I suppose. This is something that everybody grows up in Poland, kind of hearing of this tale as a child. And it's an important part of our folklore and the kind of legends that are just being part of our identity, I guess. And being a practitioner of witchcraft and of folk magic, I personally relate to the figure of Mr. Twardowski because his approach to magic and his practices that he does, it may not be that obvious in the tale itself, although there are elements, but you can kind of glean that he introduces this dual faith aspect of, at one hand, signing a pact with the devil, at the other hand, utilizing a rosary or holy water to deal with the devil, right? So it's kind of both things at the same time. And that's something that's present in my craft as well. So he's a really interesting figure who kind of represents, I guess, what you can expect from Polish practitioners of folk magic. That's for one. But also because he's a historical figure as well. He's not just a mythical, I guess, character. He was actually, the tale itself was based on the figure of Jan Twardowski, who was an occultist who lived in Krakow, Poland in the 16th century. And he was known for kind of having this pact with the devil that got him so far as to join the court of the Polish king, Zygmunt August. And he famously summoned the spirit of his deceased wife to kind of console the king. So he's a really interesting figure. And I just really wanted this tale to be out there for people to get to know it.
Oh, that is so fascinating. And when the stories are told, in your mind, is it the historical figure that people are thinking of? Or has Twardowski become sort of another mythical figure that happens to be related to the historical person, but they've almost become separate?
I'm not sure if everybody in Poland is aware that he was also a historical figure. This is kind of something that you maybe dig into more if you are a practitioner yourself, or if you are into folklore, or if you are into history and those nitty-gritty, nerdy things, right? But I think he's mostly known for the mythical aspect of him and what he represents and stands for.
Because you mentioned him using the rosary, and I know you've developed a rosary technique as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that without giving too much away for people?
Yeah, sure. So I have created something that I called the Animist Rosary. And this is a practice that anybody who wants to engage with praying the rosary, but doesn't want to approach it from the religious aspect, but mostly from the land-based, bioregional, spiritual aspect of it, you can utilize the rosary in that way, not necessarily through the Catholic lens, right? So in my practice, I have been using the rosary since childhood, since I was a witch myself, right? Because it's just something that you grow up with in Poland. You grow up praying it, you grow up kind of holding it in moments where life is tough, I guess. And it's just something that's kind of seeps over into your witchcraft practice as well as a folk practitioner. So for me, this has been something that I utilized since forever, and I just wanted people more broadly to be able to access that as well, because I know that especially for folks, I mostly work with folks who have Slavic or Polish roots but live in America. So those people often don't have access to this more folk Catholicism side of things. It's mostly either pure Catholicism or just very far away kind of tales that are missing very important bits of information, right? So I really want to make it a point with the things that I offer to people and I teach about, that I kind of make this bridge available with the info that's missing, with the living folk tradition that mixes in the Catholic aspects with the more pre-Christian, pagan, and heretical aspects as well. So this is kind of what I'm doing with the Animist Rosary, and I've been really excited to be doing that with people the past couple weeks. So yeah, it's been great.
That is so intriguing. You post that it follows the format of the traditional rosary. So are there three sets of mysteries then that you've developed for this?
Yeah, so basically the traditional rosary in the Catholic format, you kind of contemplate things as you pray the decades of the rosary. And for one full set of a rosary prayer, you have kind of 5 mysteries that focus on one aspect of the experience of life. In the case of the traditional rosary, that would be contemplating the life of Mary. But in this more heretical animist aspect, we are contemplating the same, I suppose, life issues or life circumstances that you would with the traditional one, but through the lens that includes land-based spirituality. So, for example, the traditional mysteries of the Rosary are joyous ones, sorrowful ones, and glorious ones. And they touch on very important kind of staple life experiences, and they touch on grief, on death, as well as on kind of dealing with overcoming those big problems in life. So you can, of course, contemplate that through the Catholic lens if you are traditional, but you can also apply that to a more broader and less religious experience of life. So that's what I'm kind of doing with that.
I love that. And people can find out more about your rosary, the Animist Rosary Mysteries, on your Patreon, correct?
Yeah, that's basically where you get all of the actual meaty stuff from me. I don't post much of that publicly. It's something that's usually with a closed group because it allows for more intimacy with those practices. So yeah, the Patreon is where the good stuff is.
A friend of mine has an occult shop, Augustine's Spiritual Goods, and years ago she was holding rosary prayer meetings there, maybe monthly, I think. And she was relating how, having heard the nuns in the convents in Poland, that they would pray it and they would pray so fast. It was almost like the buzzing of bees, and how it could invoke a trance-like state just going through so quickly and so repetitively.
Absolutely.
Dave, did you have any initial thoughts to the Legend of Twardowski when we read it?
I found it quite interesting just because we have the Legend of Faustus here, which certain parts of this reminded me of that legend.
Yes.
But I thought that it was amazing to me that his first inclination was not to call out to God, but to call out to the devil. And that to me was pretty amazing, and then everything just stops, disappears. And then here's this gnarly looking little devil staring him in the face.
Yeah, I love that too. And I had to reread for a moment because everything happens so fast. When he calls out, the response is immediate. And it surprised me how quickly the devil responds.
Well, and the thing that got me too was the description of the devil. Mm-hmm. I mean, you get such a detailed description. He's sharp-nosed, tightly clothed. His tail beats his heels, and a horn was showing out from the hat. And he smelled of beer, which I thought that was fascinating because you think of that, and it includes everything that you would think of as far as evil, and then add the little bit of alcohol to it.
You know what's also funny is that description also fits an average nobleman from Poland from around that time. And the interesting thing, I don't know if you would like to mention for me to mention this already, but the Polish devils, we have many, many, many devils, but many of them have been noblemen in their human life before they became the devils, right? So you can kind of be guessing from this story whether this devil, what's his origin? Is he coming from a nobleman from his previous life? Is he something else? You never really know, right? But by that description, it's kind of hinting at his noble past.
Is this a traditional description of the devil in Poland, like the cliche red-hooved with horns, or do you have other common descriptions?
You get many, actually, because depending on the context, as I said, we have many devils, and it's kind of like with patron saints almost, where you have one for each thing that you can think of in life. And that's kind of the same thing with the devils in Poland. So you have some of those with like more noble affinity and stemming from that and dealing more with men who want to sign a pact, and basically they're just collect the soul, and they look very much like a nobleman, but they have like the horn or the hoofs, but they are usually like concealed. And then you have devils that are more dwelling in nature in specific places, and those look more wild and are described either as, very hairy or red sometimes, or having some strange beast-like features, but they are usually horned, hoofed, and with a tail. That's kind of the main descriptive. Sometimes they also are missing like the holes in your nose, basically. So yeah, kind of a creepy, I suppose, rendition of the devil. But overall, like they have those few things in common that you would stereotypically think of as the devil, but depending on where they dwell and what their function is, they would be kind of different to, I guess, note where they are coming from. What's their origin, or what's their purpose, what they are specializing in, you could say, almost.
And the gifts that the devil gives Twardowski are good. I mean, he gives him riches, but also the power to cure people, the power to do objectively beneficial things. And it's very funny to me that the Christian church would have these associations of being able to benefit society through gifts from the devil.
Yeah, but I think this is actually something that's characteristic very much of the Polish culture, that there's this syncretism and this dual faith where we even have this saying that it's like you are supposed to give a candle for God and at the same time a wick for the devil. So kind of being on good terms with both realms, just to make sure that if you actually need help, that you can call on both and kind of see who responds first, so you are not left struggling. And I think this is very typical of the Polish kind of more rural society over the centuries, that folks didn't really care that much whether it's a celestial power or an infernal one. As long as you help me, as long as you save me from those struggles that I'm dealing with, we are good. I don't care if you are a demon, devil, or whatever else, right? So there's not this clear distinction between good and evil in that way, I guess, in like Polish morality or ethics, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever gets the job done.
Well, and I think that also corresponds with folk magic here in the Americas, too. You see a lot of people that, even though they may work with, for lack of better terms, devils, demons, things like that, but they also will incorporate the Psalms and the Bible and other parts of it into their magic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it works together somehow, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's really interesting. Like in Polish folklore, there's a lot of this back and forth between the devil and Mary, especially. And they both seem to be actually fulfilling the same role in terms of being those intermediaries between the larger forces and humans, and both equally caring to be on good terms with people, with humans, and helping them for whatever agendas that they have behind that help. But it's just those two figures could be seen as almost interchangeable in some way. I guess it's kind of similar to how in some folk magics, like for example, from what I know, at least from like Southern America, where folks work a lot with the devil, but also saints. Mm-hmm. Right? And kind of combining that together. So this is similar in that way.
And how historical that belief is as well. I just pulled up this quote from King James of England, who wrote the Demonology, and he says that the devil appears to the witch in the form of a beast, and he can answer her demands, such as the concerns of curing diseases, or other base things as they are require of him. And I think it's so funny that he's trying to cast down the idea of dealing with the devil when they're obtaining things that are actually helpful to people, the actual curing of the diseases, not just blind faith. And this is such a historical aspect of the craft and our work with the folk devil.
Yeah, right. It's kind of funny to me, that you sometimes you kind of see very religious people in general trying to convince you against the occult, or broadly, like, those arts, I guess, by saying that the devil will teach you science, that they will teach you how to, do all those natural things. And you're like, wow, I will take it. This is amazing, right? Like, what's wrong with this? So that's kind of what it seems like as well. It's a good deal.
It's a good deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Until in these stories, the worry is when he comes to collect.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and the thing that caught me was, and you see this in a lot of American folklore too, is that the devil's seen as a trickster. That he will manipulate a situation to get what he wants, but you also see Mr. Twardowski doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think past guests to the circle, Elohim Leafar and Brett Hollyhead, the Welsh witch, have both talked about how in their stories, in their folk stories, the devil is very much a comic figure, a figure that is there for the other characters to outwit, to trick. And that's almost what we see here. We see Twardowski attempting to outwit the devil and to trick him, but it kind of goes back and forth, double crossing. Do you want to recap a little bit about the twist endings of the tale, Joanna?
Yeah, sure. So the idea is that the devil thinks they're going to collect the soul on Twardowski, except he has some tiny details in the contract that make it very hard for the devil to collect, because he wanted for the devil to only be able to collect the soul in Rome, which he never wanted to visit, right? So it was very easy. I'm just never going to go to Rome, so they are never going to collect my soul. Except the problem is that at the very end, he enters a tavern, and it turns out that that tavern was called Rome. And that's when the devil just saw, like, this is my moment. I need to come in right now and snatch him, right? Otherwise, I'm never going to be able to collect. So he does that, and he captures Twardowski and takes him somewhere, supposedly to hell. Except Twardowski, again, whips out his rosary, starts praying to Mary, and that's what saves him. But unfortunately, he lands on the moon, and that's where he stays for the rest of eternity, basically.
I know we just jumped to the end, but there's some really interesting details about the end if you start thinking about it. So, one, it's very funny. It's an entertaining tale. And I do wonder if there's any connection between him saying the devil can take him in Rome and that being the ecclesiastic seat, like the seat of the authority of the church, is kind of funny. But also that hell, which is usually thought of as an underground, here they are flying through the sky to get there.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of confusing, right? Because you don't really know where he's taking them. And it kind of sounds like they are flying upwards somewhere to the heavens. So this is all very much confusing to the recipient of the story.
And he prays to Mary, who is often depicted with her foot, like rested on the moon. And when she saves him, that's where he lands. Now he's the literal man in the moon.
Yes, exactly. Man in the moon, which is very interesting because that's also a descriptive that very often is applied to the devil himself as well, right?
Really?
Yeah. In some folk stories, yeah.
Are there any explanations for the devil's association with the moon?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of, honestly, but in Polish folklore in general, the moon and the moon's relationship with humans and with the earth in general is very complex. First of all, the moon in Polish folklore is considered to be male, not female, as usually with associated with goddesses, right? Elsewhere. And depending on the phase, like he will either be benevolent or he can really, he can fuck you up, right? Like depending on the moon phase, basically. So I think the moon himself in Polish folklore is very much like a trickster figure. In some of his phases, he's also like open to sustaining specific kinds of demons with the moonlight basically shining on them. Whereas, for example, in Polish folklore, the dead are scared of moonlight. So if you want to talk to your ancestors, you're supposed to do that during the dark moon. So there's a lot of like caveats, I guess, specific to our culture that make the moon very tricksterish and also associated with the devil himself, right? So Twardowski landing on the moon, you can kind of maybe start guessing, did he just become, another noble devil when he landed there? You never know. Like, it's not said explicitly. You can only guess, but yeah.
But that also intrigues me because you see a lot of European folk magic in American folk magic too. And I know that's because of the traditions that were brought over when the settlers came over. And I grew up hearing about the man in the moon. It wasn't until later in life that I heard of the moon being referenced as a female. And the first hearing of that was actually in a Broadway musical, Mame, where they talked about the man in the moon as a lady. But then you get into witchcraft, and you hear her referred to as Lady Luna and all of that. But like I said, growing up, I was introduced to the man in the moon.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that to me makes me wonder about the translation of European folk magic into American folk magic.
I know that for when it comes to the moon and its gender, Poland is definitely not the only region where the moon would be considered male. I know that in Scandinavian regions, that's the case as well. But also, I think that the kind of broadly recognized connection of the moon with a goddess, with the lady, is something that stems from neo-paganisms and the fact that they are very much based on those Greco-Roman myths, right? And they are very much different to some of those from Central Europe or Northern Europe. So I think depending on the region, like both can be true, of course. So it depends like which heritage is more close to you and matters more to you, you feel more connected with, and then you kind of structure the rest of your worldview around that.
And linguistically, if it's a gendered language, because I believe like in Mesoamerica, the moon was initially an old man, but when colonized and the predominant language became Spanish, now it's female because the word is female. And I think that ends up playing a big part in the associations, like a two-way association maybe, where the word is influenced by whatever the beliefs are, but the beliefs are also influenced by whatever the word in the language is. I was always also taught in a very neo-pagan sense that as the full moon increases, so does the etheric and psychic abilities. So speaking with the spirits and such to be strengthened during the light of the moon. So it's really fascinating to hear you talk about how in your folklore, the spirits were afraid of the moonlight.
But especially the dead, right? Because during the full moon, some spirits, and especially some of those land spirits that are more like maliciously inclined towards humanity, they actually feed off of moonlight of the full moon. And that's when they are the most powerful. So you need to be really careful to, if you want to step outside or not during the full moon, in case you get snatched by one of those demons. Because in Poland, land spirits are usually referred to either as demons or as devils. That's like a common thing. And I know that usually people associate those words with evil powers, but that's not necessarily the case over here. Demon is like a common term, and the devil is like more specific for those who actually can do stuff, right? So, yeah.
And Joanna, didn't I hear you say that during the dark moon that was when petitions were made? Or maybe I misheard.
Sorry, again?
I may have misheard, but did you say that it's during the dark moon that petitions are made, or no?
I said that if you want to commune with the dead and speak to them and ask something of them specifically, that would be during the dark moon, yeah.
Okay, because some practices here I've heard that the dark moon is a time of rest. So that would kind of fall in there, because if you wanted to commune with the dead, which it sounds like in Polish folk magic that wasn't necessarily something that was sought after, but that you would do it during that dark moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
And linking things with the moon now sometimes can be considered poetic or romantic, but in the past was often an offense because the moon is inconsistent. And like in the older significances of the tarot, it meant illusion or deception. So there are, it's interesting to see how many interpretations there are of the figure of the moon. Were there other ways that this tale inspired your personal practice?
I think growing up with tales like this, and I have to say, like Polish folklore and Polish legends in general, they are kind of leaning darker and more like sinister a lot of the times. So if you grow up immersed in that kind of folklore, it does inspire your craft a lot. Twardowski, for example, as a figure, studying the myth and the legend of him, as well as the historical figure of him, is very inspiring for my craft because it's not in the myth itself, but he was known for example, mirror scrying. That was his specialty. And we know that he also studied alchemy. And there was even like a cave somewhere like in the outskirts of Krakow discovered, where in that cave there were like signs of an alchemical workings going on, basically. So yeah, it's a lot. And when you study those aspects of that, and heck, there are even entire books studying what he was doing as a practitioner. Like everything about him can be so inspiring for your craft. I guess it's kind of like for the UK, John Dee and Edward Kelly, right? That kind of a figure. There are some parallels as well with that. And I just recently actually learned that those two lived in Krakow for a very short period of time. So there are some researchers who also think that Twardowski's story could have been inspired by, John Dee and Edward Kelly, but we don't really know. So, but anyway, yeah, he's a very inspiring figure that, for example, one thing that is something that I want to do and recreate from his works is doing the exact same mirror that he used, because it's actually still preserved in a church, funnily, where they keep that mirror as a kind of, trinket, I suppose, but also trying to protect it from ever being used again. But we have pictures of that. So I want to recreate the same thing and try to use it in my craft as well. So, there's a lot of details like that you can pull directly from the stories, from the folklore, and try in your craft.
Do you know, is the mirror on display, or is it hidden away in a vault somewhere?
As far as I know, it's not like hanging in the main chambers of the church, but it's in the sacristy part where you can kind of enter the back chambers, and it's hanging there somewhere. Wow. So it's kind of funny, I think, that things like this are in a church, but that's not the only thing. I know that quite a few those strange and mysterious objects that have legends of being used for occult purposes, kind of either being inserted into walls in churches in Poland, or like used as foundations for stairs, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of funny that a lot of the places that are sacred to Catholics over here actually have those occult objects built into them almost, right? Mm-hmm. It also speaks to this dualism, this dual faith aspect of our identity.
Mm-hmm. Would you recommend people trying to reconnect with their Polish folk magic roots, that on a dark moon they attempt to communicate with Twardowski?
I think that would be really interesting to do. Although I think when working with figures like that, you need to be kind of cautious, because you never know. Like especially if you are scared of more devilish aspects of the craft. I know that it's kind of scary for some people. So I would definitely be cautious. I had my attempts at communication with Twardowski through divination, etc. back in the day. It was really interesting, not necessarily the kind of results I expected, but I think it's something worth trying for sure, especially if you know that they were an actual person a historical person, right? And not just somebody from stories that you kind of are not sure if they ever existed or not. So yeah, I would recommend, but be cautious.
I love that so much. And you have a book that is approaching in the next upcoming year. Is it an overall distillation of your practice?
I don't know how much I can be open about at this stage, but all I can say that it's definitely a book aimed at people from the Polish or Slavic diaspora who would like to connect with Polish folk magic or Slavic folk magic, especially of the Western Slavs, which Poland is part of that. It will be covering, of course, practices, but explained both in theory and practice, because I am very diligent about that stuff. I want people to actually know why things work the way they do, explain that through folklore, through practical stuff as well. And also one thing that I think is very important for people to also know, so I'm including that for sure, is a entire complete folkloric calendar of dates that are actually important to us in our practice. So that's going to be something included as well. And some other juicy bits that I can't really talk about right now. But yeah, I'm very excited.
I totally understand. Something that I think we kind of conflated as we've been referring to the story, but in the version that you told us, the Twardowski that becomes famous and has all these gifts is not actually the one who first sells himself to the devil. He was sold by his father, correct? So then we were first speaking about the Twardowski who calls to the devil instead of God, and when all his assailants disappeared. And that was actually the father, and he's tricked into selling the son. And that seems to be an interesting part of the story as well, because the son does end up growing up with all these gifts and becoming famous, but it wasn't initially his own choice.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting part of the story that kind of speaks of fate and how some things are almost predetermined in a way. When Twardowski, being only 12 years old, by the way, learns from the father that that was the case, that the father signed a deal with the devil and unknowingly sold his son, basically, he walks to hell, right, to retrieve that pact and to free himself of that bind. I think that by the time that he reached that age, he was already blessed with that knowledge, infernal knowledge, and those skills, because he already mentions, like, I know so many exorcisms. Don't worry, Father, I'm going to go there and retrieve that. And you don't have to ever grieve this thing again, right? So he saves himself first. But the devils, as he leaves with the contract, they tell him that he's probably going to be back again. And that's kind of foretelling his future, because many years later, he's this occultist. He has his workshop, alchemical workshop, and, summoning the dead and God knows what else. But he's like, I need to have those skills, and I think I'm not able to gain them myself. So actually, maybe I'm going to summon the devil, because I think he can do that for me. And he willingly goes into the same situations, gets himself into the same situation again, where he puts his soul at stake. But I think that's kind of because that makes him brave, because he knows that he once already retrieved his soul back, so maybe he can do that again, right? It's something that's also very, I guess, kind of typical for our approach to devils as well, because in folklore, the devils, some of them at least, are often portrayed as not being the smartest, sometimes kind of seen as, like half-witted, etc. So folks, I guess it's never explicit that if you sign a pact that you're actually going to have to pay the price of your soul. Sometimes it's like, maybe I can, do something and basically be smarter than them somehow. And it's this back and forth bargaining for that one soul. It's a lot of work. I think like those devils don't have an easy life, honestly, because they have to, constantly just bargain with every single person. But what is also interesting, I want to touch on this as well. I just remembered that when it comes to the folkloric stories of the devil, the traditional ones in Polish lore, it's most often that men sign pacts with the devil while females, especially like those who dabble in witchcraft, etc., they are more on friendly terms with devils. So it's not like they have to sign a pact. It's more like they exchange goods. Oftentimes that includes sex as well, right? So when it comes to females, I guess they don't have to pay as big of a price, whereas males have a harder time where it has to be a contract and they have to give their soul at the end. So it's really interesting in that way as well, this kind of dichotomy between, female witches and those noblemen, because they were usually noblemen dabbling with, some of the forbidden arts. So, yeah.
And I think that part is when he's an adult and he's reached the end of the bounds of his knowledge and he still wants more. That's the part that resonates or echoes more with the tale of Faust, right, Dave?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think that's a huge thing as far as European tradition and American tradition intertwining, because if you look at the witchcraft trials, it was always about making a pact with or sleeping with or a sexualized act with the devil. So that really solidified a lot of that history for me. And in watching Mr. Twardowski, the son, he wants to further his knowledge of the occult, the craft. So that again ties into the historical with the, okay, I've got to make this pact to get the powers I need or to get the knowledge I need. And I think that it was intriguing to me that it was knowledge based. It wasn't necessarily that I want to be able to wave my fingers and go, ooh, when something happens. It was the knowledge that he wanted.
Yeah, knowledge and eternal youth as well. Right?
Exactly. I mean, the two things that we constantly are hungry for.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of the difference between the men and the women that were accused of this, was there a strong witch panic in Poland like there was across most of Europe?
You know what? I think that I studied this extensively, actually, because I really love reading the witch trial records and the practices that were recorded, because oftentimes there's so much juicy stuff about the incantations and the nitty-gritty, right? So I have studied a lot of that. And actually, I have to say that in Poland, per se, it wasn't as persistent and there weren't as many folks who got persecuted as in the West. I think that has to do with the difference. Like in Poland, there was mostly Catholicism, whereas in the West, there was already the Protestant religion, right? And I think where there were Protestants, there were many more of those persecutions compared to the places where Catholicism was the main religion. And I think that's kind of interesting because at that point in history, it wasn't really that much about those religious aspects as it was about politics. And Catholicism, especially in Poland, was kind of trying to battle Protestantism seeping in and trying to take over, so they tried to do everything to win people over as well. So back in those times, you could say, were more liberal in a lot of ways to lure people in. And I think that also is why those witch trials weren't as persistent in those areas of Poland, right? So that's really interesting. And I'm really fascinated by that history.
And speaking of the pact, especially the pact versus more of a friendly relationship, there's this grimoire from the Italian trial records, the Venetian trial records, which I believe is called the Ars Rubidimar, but published as the Secrets of Solomon. And there's instructions throughout for creating the pact. It's the first part of working to make any of the subsequent workings that are heavily detailed into making them effective. However, the pact, according to the text, it's secret. And it's just spoken about in hints throughout the whole rest of the text. So you have to figure out how to put the pact back together, and then you can make the rest of the grimoire work. But the pact that it's detailing sounds much more like I want to say seduction, but not necessarily in a sexual sense, but an enticement for the spirit or demon to come. So you sing its songs and you're making the environment appealing to it. And then you come to a friendly agreement, which I believe is what the pact in the text is referring to. It's not as diabolical as it usually is in most of these tales or most grimoires.
That's really interesting. I love the vibe of that, being kind of actually putting effort into making the devil or the spirit be interested in us in some way, to want to sign with us.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool, because I feel like here in folklore, it's usually like the spirits and the devils want the pact so much that you don't have to do anything. And even like the conditions of the pact that you tell them, they can be not really favorable to the devils, but they still will sign because it's like such a compulsion to them. Whereas this is a very different kind of approach to that. I really like that,
Yeah. There's no, you have to move a mountain before you take my soul, especially that.
Yeah.
But it does state that the invocations are to be sung, which I hadn't thought of. I thought it was interesting before and would be very lovely in a ritual, of course. But now I'm wondering if there's connection between that and a liturgical setting, so how they would be sung in mass in another religious setting. And I wonder if there's some sort of similarity between those practices.
And I could see that.
That's really interesting. Honestly, I wasn't familiar with that grimoire, but now I feel like I need to research that.
It's the Secrets of Solomon. It's, if I remember correctly what I'm talking about, it's one of the sources of the Grimorum Verum, or the true grimoire, if you're familiar with that one. But I'll send you the information online.
Awesome, thank you.
I was just going to say it's really interesting that it's more of a wooing of the spirits.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you look at a lot of church history, it was the same way. It was more of a building a relationship to get what you want, essentially. And that's what it sounds like there. It sounds like you're trying to build a relationship with the devils or the demons to get your conditions met, rather than them coming to you and saying, okay, I'll give you this if you'll give me your soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What would you like to tell people about anything you have coming up in late summer or fall, where people can find you, and anything else you want people to know before we close out today?
To be honest, this year I'm mostly focusing on writing my book and making sure that it's an actual good book. At least I'm really hoping for it to be. But I always have ongoing projects that people can join for. I always have a book club going, which people can join for, like live discussions and structured group conversations on specific practices, as well as I have a group project that's called the Toad Pond, which I love the name of it. And in the Toad Pond, each month in a group of people, we vote for a practical theme that we focus on actually doing for the entirety of the month. It's usually something that has to do with crafting things for your practice, or really focusing on honing in specific skills, etc. So that's something that's ongoing always in my space on Patreon. And other than that, when it comes to projects that are potentially coming up, I'm always very spontaneous with that. So you never know what you're going to get from me. That's just the reality of how I am. I guess that maybe I am too influenced by the devil and his nature. So if you would like to, meet me, talk to me, work with me, I am available on all social media by the name Polish Folk Witch. And you can check me out and see.
Wonderful.
Like
the Toad Pond. I didn't know about that one, and I love that.
Thank you.
Hey, Dave, what do you have coming up this late summer or fall that you would like to tell people about?
July, here in Atlanta, and I will be teaching a class called Healing Through Ancestor Magic, Navigating Past Trauma. And I have a few book signings in the works, so keep an eye out for that. And like I said, I'll be writing the rest of this year to get a new book out by the summer of 2025.
Wonderful. I really love your first book. I'm very excited for the second, and I'm very excited to see you in person at Mystic South, where I will also be and presenting a paper on ecstatic practices and grim fairy tales. Although by the time this comes out, that might have happened already. And I will try to spread that information via other venues, but I don't know how yet. And with that, may all your travels be filled with wonder.